Welcome back to her Fireside Stories, dear listeners. Today, I have an incredible story for you, one filled with shocking family betrayals, hidden resentments, and an extraordinary moment that changed everything. Imagine your own grandson burning you and your family simply ignoring it as if it never happened. But our protagonist doesn't stop there. She decides to leave quietly, taking something with her that her family will never, ever forget. What did she take? How did it all unfold? Trust me, you won't believe the bold twist at the end unless you listen closely. Don't forget to subscribe to her Fireside Stories for more captivating tales, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or telling us where you're listening from. I'd love to hear from each of you. I still remember the exact moment my own grandson, Leo, threw scalding water across my chest, the splash of near-boiling liquid, the blinding rush of pain, and the stunned silence that followed. Hard to believe, I know, a child causing such harm, but it felt like the culmination of years, decades even, of buried tensions in that household. My name is Celine, and for most of my adult life, I believed my worth lay in how perfectly I could feed, clean, and care for everyone around me. We lived in a modest, two-story suburban home whose walls had somehow started shrinking in on me over the last few years. Birthdays, family dinners, holiday gatherings, you name it, I hosted. Often I'd be cooped up in the kitchen, ignoring the ache in my back and the swirl of anxious thoughts in my mind, too afraid to voice any dissatisfaction. Why would I rock the boat, after all, when I'd been taught for so long that my purpose was to keep the peace? On the day of Leo's 7th birthday, I was elbow deep in food preparations, sauces bubbling on the stove, a roast in the oven, and multiple side dishes in mid-prep. I'd even stacked rows of cut vegetables like a restaurant line cook. Everyone else was in the living room. My daughter Alice, who sports an edgy undercut dyed pastel pink, she says it makes her feel youthful. Her husband Jordan, tall and trim with a half-buzzed fade, and my husband Thomas, a silver-haired man whose once charming grin had soured into a perpetual scowl. My grandson Leo, who'd just begun insisting on a spiked haircut with a bright green streak at the front, ran back and forth with his plastic sword, hacking at imaginary foes. And at the center of it all, perched elegantly on my couch, sat Miranda, an old flame from Thomas's youth, sporting a neatly styled bob with sandy blonde highlights. I can't explain how she'd wormed her way so quickly into our gatherings. She'd just shown up and made herself at home. Perhaps that's why, when the screaming started after the hot water splashed across my chest, no one rushed to my aid. Instead, they minimized the wound, chastising me for overreacting. And that was just the beginning. Earlier that morning, I'd been bracing myself for chaos. Leo's birthday parties always turned the house upside down. Balloons crowding the ceiling, wrapping paper ripped to shreds on the floor, kids hopped up on soda and candy, shrieking like wild things, and me rarely finishing a full conversation with anyone because I was endlessly called back to the kitchen. I'd slip out from behind the stove to hand off a plate of fresh-baked cupcakes or bowl of fruit salad, only to be beckoned again. The old me would have swallowed the frustration, hoping maybe someone would see how ragged I was running, but time had worn me thin. After so many years, I barely recognized my own reflection. My hair used to be dark and shiny. Now I kept it chin-length, dyed a soft silver to embrace the gray. When I stared in the mirror that morning, I found a woman whose eyes had dulled, as though my spirit had been siphoned off slowly over time. The day started with my daughter Alice's demands. "Mom, can you make sure we have enough of Leo's favorite dessert? And oh, could you fix something vegetarian for Jordan? He's trying a new diet." I just nodded, though my mind was screaming. Then Thomas, on his way out to pick up more chairs, grumbled about some small matter, how I never seemed to remember to buy his specific brand of coffee pods. It struck me that I'd devoted half my life to memorizing everyone's preferences, and still, somehow, it was never enough. The final straw was Miranda's presence in the house. She'd arrived unannounced the day before, wearing a pastel sweater dress that showcased her trim figure. She'd breezed right past me with a polite smile, like an established friend returning home. It was bizarre. I was married to Thomas for 40 years, and suddenly this old fling was part of family events? A pit of dread had been sitting in my stomach all morning, so when the scalding water finally hit me, it lit a fuse that had been waiting to explode. When Leo flung that cup, whether by accident or on purpose, I'm still not entirely sure. Time slowed. I watched, almost detached, as steaming liquid arced through the air and smacked my chest. For a second, it felt like the burn was in my soul, as much as on my skin. I howled, not just from physical pain, but from the sudden clarity. This was exactly how little they saw me. When Thomas hurried into the kitchen, I expected shock or at least concern, but his face settled into annoyance. "He's just a kid," he muttered. "Don't blow this out of proportion, Celine." Don't blow this out of proportion? My flesh stung, my nerves screamed, and my husband of 4 decades acted like it was a trivial inconvenience. Alice darted over, scooped Leo up, and shot me a reprimanding glare, as though I'd spooked him on purpose by screaming. "Leo's only 7, Mom," she sighed. "Why do you always make a scene?" Meanwhile, Jordan lingered in the hallway, refusing to meet my eye. And Miranda? She reached into her purse, dabbed at her lipstick, and surveyed the fiasco like a calm spectator, the corners of her mouth turned up in the faintest of smiles. With her subtly highlighted bob kept in perfect shape, she looked too composed, too ready for this moment. I swear I caught a glimmer of triumph in her eyes, like she had been waiting for my downfall. Everything else blurred, my clothes stuck to me, hot liquid stinging my skin. Leo cried loudly, but only because he'd been frightened by my shout. Any apology he offered was overshadowed by Thomas's scolding. "Celine, can you please not ruin your grandson's birthday? You can treat that after the party." That was the moment I realized how deeply I had been taken for granted. They saw my burns and shrugged. They saw my tears and rolled their eyes. So I left the mess behind, marched upstairs to strip off my soaked clothes, and stared at the red, angry marks spreading across my chest. And in that reflection, as the tears slid silently down my cheeks, I promised myself, no more. Quick check-in. Let me know if this story is resonating with you so far. Comment 1 if you're glued to it, or comment 2 if you think it needs a twist. By the time I returned downstairs, stung skin covered by a fresh blouse, the party was wrapping up. Plates strewn everywhere, confetti ground into the carpet, wrapping paper trampled in small, muddy footprints. My anger simmered just beneath the surface, but no one seemed to notice. They laughed about old stories and teased Miranda about her hairstyle, remarking on how flawless her bob remained, even after chasing Leo around for a few minutes. "Her hair is so on trend for her age. You should try it too, Celine," Thomas joked, like I was a second-hand doll who needed a makeover. Leo was perched on Miranda's lap, fiddling with the plastic sword he'd gotten for his birthday. "Grandma Miranda," he called her, glowing with excitement. My breath caught at the sound of those words. Grandma Miranda? A sob of betrayal threatened to escape me. I have been this boy's grandmother since the day he was born, changing diapers, singing lullabies, saving up for his gifts. But apparently, that title was up for grabs to anyone who offered an easier laugh. I remember shutting my eyes for a second, urging myself not to let them see me crack. The burn on my chest throbbed, a stark reminder that I was, in fact, still human and capable of feeling. Inside that pain, a thought took hold. I need to leave. Thomas approached me, crumpled a paper plate in his fist, and muttered, "Next time, can you be a bit more organized? You seemed pretty scatterbrained today. And don't forget, you still have to clean up after everyone leaves. I opened my mouth, dumbfounded. Clean up? He expected me to tidy the aftermath of a party where I'd been treated like a side character and physically hurt? My eyes traveled around the room, from Alice to Jordan, from Leo to Miranda, searching for any spark of compassion. Alice cast me a perfunctory glance, then returned to rummaging through gift bags. Jordan scrolled on his phone. Miranda locked eyes with me, an almost pitying look on her face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She whispered something to Leo, who giggled. That was the last straw. I grabbed a kitchen cloth and started wiping the counters with angry, jerky motions, though what I really wanted to do was shout at every one of them. My arms trembled with leftover adrenaline from the burn, from the silent betrayal, and from the humiliating new title bestowed upon Miranda. Then, from the living room, I heard Alice's voice ring out in that same dismissive tone. Mom's used to it. She's always been in charge of cleaning. Let her handle it, guys. I froze. That single sentence cut me deeper than the scalding water ever could. Used to it, she said, as if my entire identity could be summarized in 4 words, as if I lived to be their servant, wearing myself out until the day I dropped dead in that same kitchen. They showed no gratitude, no awareness that I had spent years of my life keeping that household afloat. All my dreams, the ones I once had in my youth, had shriveled under the burden of pleasing them. I decided, right then and there, that I needed to act. Not just for me, but for the part of me that still believed in living a fulfilling life, one that didn't revolve around chores and neglect. Quietly, I slipped out the back door. A crisp breeze greeted me, swirling fallen leaves around my feet. I pressed a hand to my chest, still throbbing with a dull burn. I needed medical attention, but first I needed to protect my heart from that suffocating environment. My mind churned with the memory of my own parents, how my mother had once told me that women's strength comes from enduring. Endure, Celine, endure. That's how you show love. For so long, I believed it. But in that moment, I recognized something vital. Endurance without reciprocation can rot the soul. I took out my phone and booked a rideshare to the nearest clinic. Let them eat cold leftovers. Let them deal with the messy living room, if they even noticed I was gone. As I waited, I gazed up at the sky. Despite the throbbing pain, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This time, I wouldn't look back. The clinic was understaffed and crowded, but I eventually ended up in an exam room with a thoughtful nurse who dabbed ointment on my reddened skin. Ma'am, you should be careful with burns. This could have been worse. Will you have someone at home to help you change the bandages? She asked, brown eyes full of concern. I almost laughed. Someone at home? Did it count if they were the ones who'd caused the burn in the first place, however indirectly? I shook my head. I'll manage, I said, offering a polite, weary smile. She gave me instructions about pain relief and checking for infection, then disappeared, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wanted to sob, but not from physical pain. The real ache came from understanding just how truly disposable I'd become to my own flesh and blood. In that dull clinic light, I fumbled for my phone and opened my messages. Several missed calls from Alice, one from Jordan, nothing from Thomas. A single text from my grandson, Leo, spelled out in short phrases, I'm sorry, Grandma. My chest clenched. He was only a child, innocent enough to be parroting the adult attitudes around him. Yet, had anyone taught him empathy? My phone buzzed again, Alice calling. I let it ring out. When she tried a second time, I picked up. Her voice was shrill, skipping greetings entirely. Where did you go? People are leaving and the house is a mess. Dad's mad. You can't just walk out on your grandson's birthday. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat. Alice, I said quietly, Leo burned me. I needed medical care. She hesitated for a moment, as though that fact just now registered. You know kids, she retorted weakly. But yeah, sorry, I guess. Will you be home soon? I closed my eyes, picturing the cold hush of that house. I'm not sure, I lied. Then I hung up, because the truth was forming, slowly but clearly. I was done with them. After all those years, done. Your thoughts? Comment where you're reading from. Let's see how many different locations our story can reach. I stepped out of the clinic into a hazy afternoon. The sun was hidden behind clouds, giving the world a washed out look. My phone vibrated with more notifications, but I ignored them. Instead, I hailed a cab and directed the driver to a modest hotel downtown. Even as the taxi rattled over potholes, I couldn't shake a haunting sense of both freedom and fear. My entire life had revolved around that house, those people. Now I was on the verge of stepping away for good. Once I reached the hotel lobby, a clean, nondescript space with beige walls and an overworked receptionist, I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. I paid for 2 nights in cash, ignoring the pang in my stomach that worried about money. Over the years, I had a small savings tucked away, scraping bits here and there from my housekeeping jobs and from being frugal with the family budget. I doubted Thomas even noticed the nest egg's existence. And if he had, he wouldn't have cared. My money was never the priority. But for me, that little stash was now my lifeline. Once in my room, I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My silver hair was frizzing at the ends, and the tension on my face made me look older than my 67 years. Ever since I was a teenager, I'd grown my hair out thick and curly, a style that Thomas once claimed was too wild. And over time, I'd cut it shorter, pinned it back, tried a dozen ways to make it neat. Looking back, every styling choice was so Thomas wouldn't complain. Now I touched my hair lightly, imagining something new. Maybe a style I truly liked, rather than one meant to appease anyone else. I checked my burn. The nurse's ointment had worked some magic, but the area was still inflamed. A prickly heat radiated from beneath the bandage. Something about that pain felt clarifying, too. It reminded me that if I decided to go back, it would only reopen old wounds, emotional ones far deeper than this physical burn. I'm not going back, I told myself. Not until I decided what to do with my future, if there was a place for them in it at all. That night, I fell into a fitful sleep and dreamed of past moments when I'd first realized my family took me for granted. One dream stood out. It was an evening decades ago. Thomas had just come home from work, his short salt and pepper hair still neatly combed. He'd thrown his jacket onto a chair and said, "Celine, where's dinner?" As though my entire existence was to wait at the door like a personal cook. In the dream, I recalled how Alice and her younger brother Jonah, who passed away in a car accident when he was 20, would crowd around the table, ignoring me as I served. It's not that they were mean children. They were just following the example set by their father. I'd spoon soup into bowls, anxious that it might be too salty or too cold, because a single misstep would earn me that look from Thomas. The look that said, "You can't do anything right, can you?" I jolted awake in the hotel bed, bathed in sweat. My heart thumped an erratic beat against my ribs. I had to remind myself of the present. Jonah's gone. Alice is grown. Thomas is a stranger. And I'm free? It was surreal. My phone screen glowed on the nightstand. I had a new text from Thomas. "Come home, or else." The words were as cold and direct as I expected. Or else what? I thought, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. He had no hold on me besides the legal ties of marriage, but maybe it was time to break those too. Then it struck me. I'd always been the caretaker, the doormat, the person whose identity was to serve. But in that moment, in that lonely hotel room with a stinging burn, I wondered if I could still redefine my entire life. I reached for my phone and typed into a search bar. "Divorce at 60 plus. Can it be done?" A flood of links popped up. stories of women who'd left late-stage marriages, blog posts about seniors finding new beginnings. It felt like a beacon of hope, and I knew deep down that hope was what I needed most right now. The next morning, I gathered the nerve to see a lawyer. A friendly paralegal named Curtis welcomed me into the small office, offering coffee and a seat. I perched on the edge of a worn leather chair, my bandaged chest throbbing each time I moved. He asked about my situation, typed notes, and nodded with genuine sympathy as I recounted the decades of built-up neglect that culminated in being physically harmed by my grandson. When I mentioned that last part, he paused, looking at me from beneath his rimless glasses. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you've gone through that. Have you considered a restraining order or—" I shook my head. "That's not what I want," I said quietly, though a part of me wondered if I should. Leo is just a child. The bigger problem is the toxicity of my entire family dynamic. He nodded again and explained how the divorce process could work, how assets might be divided, and how spousal support might be determined. My mind swirled. Thomas always controlled the finances, and I'd never dared to question. The only money I truly had was my secret savings. Would Thomas fight me on everything? Probably. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of possibility, a sense that I had an option besides perpetual servitude. Afterward, I left the office and headed to a nearby cafe to steady myself with a cup of chamomile tea. The pale sky outside the windows matched my mood, hesitant but clearing. As I sipped, I noticed an older woman at a nearby table tapping away on a phone. Her hair dyed a bold shade of lavender. When she caught me staring, she laughed. "Midlife crisis," she joked. "Or maybe a new life renaissance." It reminded me of what I'd envisioned the night before, giving myself permission to choose a hairstyle that was mine alone. Maybe my next step would be a trip to a salon, a bold redefinition to mark this new chapter. Because I wasn't just an aging housewife with a burn on her chest. I was Celine, a woman slowly reclaiming her future. Quick feedback break. Hit comment 1 if you believe in fresh starts at any age, or comment 2 if you have doubts. I'd love to know your thoughts. Back at the hotel, my phone buzzed incessantly. I debated ignoring it, but a persistent feeling told me to answer. Sure enough, it was Alice. The moment I picked up, I could hear tension in her voice. "Mom, you just left. Dad's furious. He says if you don't come home, he'll cut you off financially. And, Miranda's still here, actually. She's been helping with Leo." My stomach lurched at the mention of Miranda. It was bad enough that Thomas allowed her into the house so brazenly. Now she was around my grandson, playing the supportive grandmother role. I pictured her carefully highlighted bob, the way she'd run her fingers over Leo's hair, telling him sweet things while I was off nursing a literal burn. Anger and sadness mingled in me like a bitter cocktail. Still, I steadied my voice. "Alice, I'm not coming home. Not yet. And if you and your father are so concerned about money, I suggest you figure out how to cook your own dinner for once." She sputtered, clearly not expecting my bluntness. "Mom, don't be unfair. Leo misses you. You know how he gets. Also, about Miranda, she's good with kids, and Dad invited her, so—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. But the implication was clear. "We don't really need you the way we used to." I exhaled a shaky breath, torn between heartbreak and relief. Didn't need me? Fine. I could finally learn what it meant to live for myself. I ended the call, placed the phone on the bedside table, and closed my eyes. All these years, I had wanted so badly to matter to them. But if they claimed they were fine without me, then maybe my best path was forward, away from that draining life. My bandages itched, a reminder that I was physically and emotionally wounded. I stared at the textured ceiling of the hotel room. If I lingered in bitterness, I'd never heal. Something had to give. My thoughts swirled back to those divorce instructions. Maybe I'd call the lawyer again and make it official, because if I didn't, I'd remain tethered to a toxic family dynamic, losing precious years I'd never get back. Later, in a moment of impulsive courage, I decided to do something radical. I packed up my few belongings from the hotel and took a bus to a neighboring town. The bus ride was bumpy, the seats worn, and the overhead lights flickered in a disorienting pattern. But despite the discomfort, I felt a quiet thrill. This was the first time in decades that I'd left my hometown without Thomas's oversight. As the bus rumbled along, I watched passing farmland under the late afternoon sun, feeling like a seed that had lain dormant too long and was finally seeking new soil. I arrived in a small, unassuming place called Pineville. Its main street was lined with mom and pop shops, a local bakery, a hardware store, and a second-hand bookstore tucked between them. I found a modest motel with a neon sign that read vacancy and decided to stay there until I figured out my next move. Pineville was calm, almost eerily so after the chaos of my home. For the first time, I breathed in the cool evening air without an alarm bell going off in my mind about what chore awaited me. I ventured to the bakery before it closed. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Marisol with flowing black curls, greeted me warmly. She took in my tired eyes, bandaged chest, and hesitant smile without a hint of judgment. I left with a simple dinner, a fresh croissant and a small cup of vegetable soup. While I ate on a park bench under an old oak tree, I savored the sensation of being alone but not lonely. For once, my body and mind weren't chained to the demands of ungrateful relatives. My phone remained silent, which was both disturbing and a relief. Perhaps they'd finally realized I wasn't rushing back. I inhaled the crisp air, letting the quietness of Pineville fill me. I might have been lost in many ways, but at least this kind of lost felt more liberating than being trapped in the shadows of a family that barely acknowledged my humanity. The next morning, while sipping coffee from the motel's vending machine, I decided to do something I'd always wanted but never dared. Get a new hairstyle, one that truly belonged to me. In the strip mall on Pineville's outskirts, I found a salon called Hair to Stay. The neon scissors logo buzzed overhead as I stepped inside. The stylist, a vibrant woman in her 50s named Lupe, had bright turquoise tips in her curly hair. She greeted me with a smile that reached her eyes, and before long, we were chatting like old friends. When I explained that I wanted a dramatic change, her face lit up. "Oh, hun, you came to the right place. Let's see what we can do." She studied my silver curls, the strands still frizzed from stress. I told her a bit about my life, just the basics, and how I needed a transformation, inside and out. Lupe nodded, and with understanding in her voice, she said, "Let's show the world who you really are." As scissors snipped away the old weight and her expert hands applied a rich mocha color, I felt layers of my past dropping to the floor alongside the hair I'd clung to for so long. Bit by bit, a new person emerged in the mirror. My reflection revealed shorter, textured curls in a color that complemented my skin tone. The style was chic and bold, nothing like the subdued bun or plain bob I'd worn for Thomas's benefit. I actually smiled, tears prickling my eyes, realizing I hadn't smiled at my reflection in ages. Lupe showed me how to care for it, recommended products that would keep the curls defined. For a moment, I felt silly. 67 years old and learning about hair products like a teenager exploring self-expression. But maybe that was the point. I was finally exploring, period. When I paid and thanked Lupe, she grinned, offering me a parting hug. Her embrace felt maternal, reminding me of something I rarely got from my own family: kindness without condition. Feedback time. Comment 1 if you're loving Celine's transformation. Comment 2 if you think she should confront the family sooner. In the following days, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Mornings in Pineville began with me strolling to Marisol's bakery for a hot drink and a pastry. We chatted each time, her gentle manner coaxing bits of my story out of me. She never judged. She simply nodded, listening to tales of neglected birthdays, belittling comments from Thomas, and the final straw of Leo's scalding water fiasco. Inevitably, though, the quiet from my phone ended. One evening, a flurry of missed calls from Alice appeared. With a deep breath, I answered the 10th ring. Instead of immediate anger, her tone was subdued. Mom, where are you? Are you okay? A note of genuine concern glimmered in her voice. I hesitated, warring with the desire to remain distant and the longing to hear something like real affection from my daughter. I'm resting, I said simply. Did something happen? Alice exhaled. I could picture her, sweaty from anxiety, pastel undercut partially hidden by a beanie she often wore. Dad and Miranda had a huge fight last night, she confessed. Miranda accused Dad of using her to get back at you. Dad said you walked out on the family, so it's all your fault. Mom, the house feels chaotic. A tiny spark of vindication flickered inside me, but I quickly smothered it. Chaos. That was what they used to call me when I'd push back, but apparently they'd found a new brand of disorder. Alice, I said softly, I'm sorry you're in the middle of that, but I can't come back just to fix everything again. You understand that, right? Her silence was telling. Then she stammered, Could you, at least, talk to Dad about it? And maybe come see Leo? He's been asking about you. I set my jaw. Only if I feel respected. Until I see actual change, I'm not stepping foot in that house. Before she could argue, I ended the call. My hands shook from the mixture of confrontation and self-assertion. For so long, I dreaded angering my daughter. But in that moment, I realized she'd never feared hurting me. The new emboldened Celine wouldn't just run back to rescue them. A few days later, I contacted Curtis, the paralegal, and told him I was ready to proceed with divorce paperwork. Even saying the word divorce out loud sent a nervous flutter through my gut. I'd spent most of my life believing that once you were married, that was it. Till death do you part. My mother raised me to endure, but endurance, I realized, was not the same as happiness, and definitely not the same as respect. I'm in Pineville, I told him. I'd like to handle everything via email if possible. He assured me it was feasible, explaining the steps, the forms I'd have to sign. While we spoke, I stood at the window of my motel room, watching the gentle sway of pine trees in the breeze. A sense of calm enveloped me, like the town itself was encouraging me to stand firm. I also asked about next steps for property division, to which Curtis said, Thomas might fight you on certain assets, especially the house, if it's fully in his name, but that's what the legal process is for. Don't lose hope. As I hung up, relief and dread mingled in my chest. Thomas wouldn't take this news well, especially with Miranda's presence creating further tension. But that was no longer my burden. I have my own life to shape now, I thought, gazing at my new reflection in the mirror. My mocha-toned curls framed a face that finally looked determined, not timid. That afternoon, I took a walk by Pineville's small lake, letting the cool air soothe my mind. The reflection of the sky danced on the water, reminding me that change, like ripples, can spread faster than expected. I thought about how that same transformation must have reverberated back at home, and I found myself smiling. For once, it was their turn to handle the fallout of a messy house, complicated relationships, and a birthday fiasco. Let them figure it out. I was done cleaning up their emotional and physical messes. No more picking up after them. It was time I set a place for myself at my own table. Every time I checked my phone that week, I found new messages from Alice and the occasional text from Jordan. But the most surprising notifications came from Leo himself. He had used his father's phone to send me short voice recordings. Each time, I'd tap the play button and hear his small, hesitant voice. Grandma, are you mad at me? Come home, please. One evening, unable to bear the child's confusion, I recorded a response. Leo, sweetie, I'm not mad at you. I just need some space right now. I got hurt and I need time to heal. But please know I love you. I hoped my words would stick in his young mind, even if the rest of the family was spinning a different narrative. Fear tugged at me that they might twist the situation, turning me into the villain who'd abandoned them. Meanwhile, Miranda was apparently still staying at our house. I heard conflicting stories from Alice. Some days, she'd complain that Miranda was dominating all the family decisions. Other days, she'd insist Miranda was the only adult with a level head. Either way, the tension was evident. Once or twice, I caught a note of regret in Alice's voice, as if she now saw how tenuous the perfect family facade had been. And Thomas, not a single call or text. It was as if I'd ceased to exist in his world. The silence, though a bit jarring, felt like a gift. I didn't want more of his wrath or manipulation. Part of me wondered if he was just waiting, convinced I'd run out of money or bravery and come crawling back. Perhaps that's why I decided to push further, to explore new possibilities I once considered unthinkable. I scheduled a meeting with a local real estate agent, using what remained of my savings to start looking for a small rental house in Pineville. Let's pause. Are you cheering for Celine's independence? Comment 1 if yes, or comment 2 if you think there's more drama ahead. The real estate agent Maureen greeted me in her cozy office, walls decorated with photos of local homes and scenic Pineville landscapes. She was a short, lively woman with chestnut brown hair in a short pixie cut, radiating energy like she could sell a cabin to a passing squirrel if she set her mind to it. When I explained my situation, needing a small, affordable place to start over, her eyes lit with that professional excitement. I've got a few listings you might like, especially if you don't mind a fixer-upper, she said, flipping through a binder. Before finalizing anything, I asked about rentals first. I wasn't sure I wanted the commitment of buying another property just yet. The idea of new repairs, taxes, and the weight of a mortgage made me cautious. At the same time, a small spark inside me imagined what it would be like to own a space that was entirely mine, untainted by Thomas's scowls or Miranda's smugness. Maureen drove me around in her squeaky SUV, pointing out vacant properties. We saw a one-bedroom cottage with peeling paint and a sagging roof, but a breathtaking garden in the back. An older man lived here until last year, Maureen explained, and he was known to have the greenest thumb in town. All sorts of flowers will bloom come spring. I pictured myself there, patching the roof, painting the walls a soft lavender, maybe planting vegetables for my own kitchen. Suddenly, I was daydreaming like I was 20 again, brimming with possibility. Ultimately, I decided to rent a small unit first, in a cozy triplex near the lake. The monthly rate was manageable, and it had a sunlit living room that felt warm and inviting. I signed the paperwork with shaky excitement. Then I used my phone to finalize the divorce forms Curtis had sent via email, scanning them at the local library. Step by step, I was disentangling myself from a life that had become a prison. As I pressed send on those documents, I felt a wave of relief. This was real. I was forging ahead, alone but stronger than I'd ever been. Moving my limited belongings from the motel to the triplex was a humble affair. A small suitcase of clothes, a few sentimental trinkets, and some toiletries. That was all I had taken when I first walked out. Everything else was still at the house I once called home. I could have demanded furniture or the family photo albums, but part of me just wanted a clean break. The divorce proceedings would settle property claims anyway. Until then, I wanted no physical reminder of the place where my spirit had been trampled. The triplex was nestled amid tall pines, with a tiny wooden porch that faced a gravel road. My new neighbor, an older gentleman named Hank, poked his head out as I struggled with my suitcase. "Need a hand?" he offered. I smiled and shrugged. "Sure, thanks." He lifted it with surprising strength and set it on my porch. We exchanged introductions. Hank had snowy white hair pulled into a short, neat ponytail. He joked, rocking the retirement rebel look, and I found it refreshing to see someone so at ease with who they were. Inside, the unit smelled faintly of fresh paint. The living room was snug but bright. The kitchen had outdated cabinets, but I didn't care. This place was a symbol of freedom. I collapsed onto the squeaky couch left by the previous tenant, noticing the quiet. No voices barking for dinner, no demands for grocery runs, no laughter at my expense, just me and the echo of my own thoughts. Strange how unsettling and beautiful solitude can be when you've never truly had it. That night, I stood by the window, gazing at the moon peeking through the pines. I touched the bandage on my chest, which I needed to replace daily. The angry burn was healing, but I knew the emotional scars would take longer. It occurred to me that I was truly living an entirely new life. Not once did I second guess my decision to leave, though a small sliver of my heart still ached for the sweet child I'd left behind, little Leo. "I do love you," I thought, hoping he could somehow sense it. A few days later, I was surprised to see a familiar face in Pineville's modest town square. Alice. My heart skipped a beat when I spotted her pastel pink undercut. She was standing by the fountain, holding Leo's hand. They appeared lost, turning in circles as if looking for someone. Caught off guard, I considered hiding, but a pang of longing for my grandson pushed me forward. So I approached cautiously, unsure how she'd react. Alice's eyes widened in relief when she saw me. Leo clutched her arm tighter. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "we've been searching for you all morning. Did you move here? How come you never told me?" I bristled at her accusing tone. "Alice, I have the right to find peace where I can, and yes, I'm living here now." Leo peered up with wide eyes and a trembling bottom lip. "Grandma, do you hate me?" His voice was thin, wavering. My heart shattered. I stooped down, ignoring the tug of pain in my chest, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Leo, sweetheart, I could never hate you. I just needed to take care of myself." He blinked tears away, nodding slowly as though a child's logic told him it made sense, sort of. Alice exhaled, glancing around the quiet square. "Dad told me you'd filed for divorce," she murmured. "He's been furious, and Miranda left. Apparently their love story wasn't as solid as they acted." A trace of bitterness crept into her words. "But that's not why we're here. Well, I wanted to see if you were okay." I studied her face, noticing for the first time the lines of stress that aged her beyond her years. We ended up at a nearby cafe, Leo sipping a hot chocolate while I tried to read Alice's expression. She seemed torn, like she wanted to be angry but also needed some maternal reassurance. I let silence do the talking at first, letting her decide what she wanted from me. Eventually, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize just how bad it was for you until you weren't there anymore." Feedback moment. Comment 1. If you think this conversation will heal their bond, or comment 2 if you foresee more conflict brewing. That tentative apology was a start, albeit a shaky one. I leaned back in my chair, letting the steam from my herbal tea warm my face. "Alice," I said gently, "I don't know what you want me to do. I can't just go back to the way things were. For 4 decades, I've sacrificed my well-being. I have a burn on my chest that still stings every time I breathe. And do you know what stings worse? The fact that all of you treated me like I was disposable." She fiddled with a napkin, eyes downcast. "You're right," she admitted in a near whisper. "I guess I I took for granted that you'd always be there. And Dad, he's never going to change, is he? A ghost of a laugh escaped me. That man is stuck in his ways. If he cared enough to try, he'd have shown it by now. Leo squirmed in his seat. I reached over to ruffle his spiky green-tipped hair. That simple motion reminded me how quickly he'd grown. Grandma, can I come over to your new place? He asked timidly, big eyes full of worry. My chest tightened. Was it wise to invite them into my fragile new sanctuary? My triplex was small, lacking the space a child might expect. But if I wanted any chance of salvaging a relationship with Leo, I couldn't push him away entirely. So I nodded. Maybe we can arrange visits once I get more settled. Alice exhaled, nodding, her pink hair flopping forward a bit. Thank you. This means a lot to him. And to me. We finished our drinks quietly. Outside, the Pineville breeze ruffled the leaves of an ancient oak. As we stepped onto the sidewalk, Alice hesitated again. Dad's threatened to fight you hard in the divorce. He thinks you're being selfish by taking half of everything. I bit back a sharp reply. How do you think I put up with his nonsense for 40 years? Instead, I calmly said, let him threaten. I have a good paralegal and I'm prepared. We parted ways there, with Leo giving me a quick hug, a hug that felt heavier with longing than any we'd shared before. After that meeting, a curious hush settled over my life in Pineville. The divorce proceedings inched forward. I left most of the communication to Curtis and only spoke with Thomas when absolutely necessary, mostly to sign documents or confirm details about the house. Thomas's voice on the line was clipped, always heavy with implied insults he didn't bother to fully conceal. Why would you want half? He sneered once. You never contributed financially. I clenched my fist around the phone. I contributed in ways you never appreciated, I replied, voice steady. And by law, I'm entitled to my share. A sharp exhale from him signaled that he'd lost this round. He ended with a frosty, well, do whatever you want. Don't come crawling back when reality hits you. It stung, but I reminded myself that his words no longer held power over me. In Pineville, I fell into a simple, contented routine. Mornings at Marisol's bakery, afternoons picking up groceries to cook just for myself, and evenings strolling by the lake or chatting with Hank on the porch. We never delved into personal stories, but there was a mutual warmth in our neighborly exchange. Sometimes I'd surprise him with a slice of homemade pie, and he'd offer to mow my small patch of lawn. These little acts of kindness, done without expectation, filled a gap in my heart I barely realized existed. I only saw Alice and Leo sporadically. She'd drive him to Pineville every couple of weekends. He'd help me bake cookies, or we'd wander through the town's tiny bookstore. He was always hesitant at first, likely confused by the abrupt shift in our relationship, but each time he left with a shy smile. I love you, Grandma, he'd mumble, hugging me. Maybe one day he'd fully grasp why I needed to leave. For now, I held on to those words as a beacon. If Thomas had a meltdown without me in the house, I barely heard about it. The less I knew, the better. I had my own life to build, a fact that fueled me each time doubts threatened to creep in. A cold snap arrived, and I found myself rummaging through my limited wardrobe for something warmer. I realized with a jolt that I had only one decent coat, and it was an old black trench that Thomas once picked for me. The memory of that shopping trip flooded back. He'd criticized every coat I liked until I gave in to the one he found practical. The memory made me shudder. So I hopped a bus to the nearest city, determined to buy myself a coat that I actually liked. The department store was bustling with holiday shoppers. Lights glittered overhead. Christmas music played softly in the background, and the mannequins displayed the latest winter fashions. Nervous but resolute, I tried on a sleek burgundy wool number with a cinched waist and plush lining. It made me feel elegant, confident. When I glanced at the price tag, my heart lurched. It was pricey, but then I reminded myself, I deserve something nice. I bought it. Every step I took, wearing that coat through the store, felt like a small revolution. If Thomas could see me, he'd say I was wasting money, but it was my money now. With the receipt safely in my purse, I stepped back into the chilly air, hugging the new coat around me with unspoken pride. On the bus ride home, I got a call from Curtis. "Celine, I've got good news," he said, cheer brimming in his voice. "Thomas is willing to settle. He's signing the papers that allow a fair split, since the judge would likely rule that way anyway. He asked me to tell you it's because he doesn't want to drag this out." I smiled wryly. I could guess the real reason. Maybe that fling with Miranda didn't pan out, and he wanted to avoid a messy trial. Whatever his motive, the result was the same. I was free. Tekken time. Comment 1. If you think Celine's journey is finally hitting a breakthrough. Comment 2 if you sense more twists in store. The settlement meant I'd receive a decent sum, enough to stand on my own comfortably. It also meant that my life was truly about to enter a new phase. No more imaginary ties binding me to that old house, those old roles, or that old name. I felt a flood of relief, followed by a strange emptiness. After all, the heartbreak of losing what you thought was family doesn't vanish overnight, even when you know leaving was right. Over the next few weeks, the final divorce decree inched closer to completion. The best part was I wouldn't have to face Thomas in court if he didn't contest the agreement. I had daydreams of traveling, of seeing the ocean in winter, or taking a train ride through scenic mountains, or maybe flying somewhere warm. But the biggest dream was a quiet one, opening a small cafe or bakery of my own in Pineville. I kept it secret, not even telling Marisol, but I jotted notes and recipe ideas in a little journal each night. The thought of building a place where people felt welcome, where no one was taken for granted, stirred something in my soul. Alice and Leo continued visiting sporadically. Each time, the tension between Alice and me lessened. She'd sometimes apologize anew for her part in neglecting me all those years, but I stopped letting resentment fuel my responses. I told her, "I don't want your pity. Just treat me like a person from now on, not a doormat." She nodded, tears occasionally wetting her eyelashes. We were forging a fragile path, but at least it was a path. Leo began calling me on his own, telling me stories about school, excitedly recounting new cartoons he'd discovered, and sometimes complaining about how bored he was at home. I'd listen, offering encouragement and the occasional grandmotherly chuckle. Each call reminded me I still had a place in someone's heart, even if I'd left the house where he lived. Families can change, I told myself, and that hope kept me from shutting them out entirely. The line between self-preservation and unconditional love felt razor thin, but I tried to navigate it gently. Finally, the day arrived. Curtis called to confirm that the divorce decree was finalized. I'd anticipated feeling overwhelmed by either joy or sadness, but instead, I felt a peaceful calm, like standing on a mountaintop and breathing crisp air. No more illusions, no more nightmares. I was Celine, no longer Mrs. Thomas Carmichael. The weight of the old name evaporated, leaving me with a sense of lightness I hadn't known was possible. The next step was the official signing at the county office. I took the bus there alone, wearing my new burgundy coat and sporting my mocha curls, carrying myself with a confidence that startled even me. Thomas was supposed to be present to sign as well, but I arrived a half hour earlier to avoid any awkward run-in. The clerk at the desk was a polite woman with bright red hair in a side braid, likely around my age. She gave me a reassuring smile as she handed me the final documents. "Sign here," she said, tapping her pen on the dotted line. My hand trembled, but not out of fear, out of triumph. I pressed the pen to the paper, scrawling my name with deliberate strokes. When I was done, I exhaled slowly, stepping back. The clerk nodded. That's it. You're officially divorced. It sounded so simple, yet it carried the weight of 4 decades of stifled dreams. Before I could linger, she added, Mr. Carmichael is just arriving. Would you prefer to leave first? I gave a quick nod. As I turned to go, Thomas entered the doorway. We locked eyes for a single tense moment. He wore a worn suit, his silver hair combed back too tightly, giving him a harsher look. He opened his mouth, but I didn't wait. I brushed past him with a polite, tight-lipped smile. There's nothing left to say. Outside, the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in bands of gold and pink, as if nature itself was celebrating my freedom. I took a slow walk to the bus stop, my coat pockets stuffed with the official papers. A gentle breeze ruffled my hair. The future lay open before me, no longer restricted by someone else's narrow expectations. I was free to fill it with what I chose. Almost there. Let me know. Comment 1 if this resolution feels right on track, or comment 2 if you'd like a shocking twist. Over the next month, I channeled all my energy into securing a small storefront in Pineville. With part of my divorce settlement, I rented a quaint spot near the town square, just a single large room with a tiny kitchenette in the back. Every day, I arrived early to sweep the floors, paint the walls a cozy cream, and stock the shelves with ingredients. I decided to call it Moonrise Cafe, a nod to my own name, Celine, which means moon. It felt fitting for this new chapter. Marisol, the bakery owner, was nothing but supportive. She cheered my plans, lent me some of her extra baking trays, and even volunteered to promote the grand opening. Hank offered to fix a wobbly table or two, greeting me every morning with a playful, check on the local handyman if you need anything else. Even Maureen popped in, praising how cute the place looked and promising to spread the word. Slowly but surely, Pineville was becoming a community I cherished. People who wanted nothing in return for their kindness, who saw me as a person, not a servant. Gone were the days of being overshadowed by Thomas or belittled by Miranda. My burn had healed into a faint scar, a reminder of pain but also of liberation. Meanwhile, updates about Thomas were sparse. Alice mentioned once that he seemed lost, calling her to complain about the lonely house or the rising cost of groceries. Miranda had long vanished, presumably tired of being a stand-in. I felt no pity. Perhaps if he'd offered me half the compassion he now demanded from others, things might have been different. But I'd given enough. Let him face the echoes of an empty home alone. The night before Moonrise Cafe's soft opening, I stood in the center of the empty dining area. Twinkling fairy lights dangled from the ceiling, reflecting off the polished tables. I inhaled the aroma of freshly baked bread cooling on the counter. Pride and serenity filled me. This was mine, born of my courage, funded by my rightful half of the settlement, and run by my own 2 hands. How are we feeling? Comment 1 if you're excited for Celine's cafe opening. Comment 2 if you'd add more drama. The grand opening was modest but heartwarming. Word of mouth brought in curious locals. Marisol arrived early, giving me a congratulatory hug. Hank swung by later, exclaiming over the fresh pastries and strong coffee. Even Maureen popped in, sampling a cinnamon roll and declaring it the best in Pineville. I beamed, bustling behind the counter with an energy I'd thought was lost to age. In the afternoon, just as the crowd began to thin, Alice showed up with Leo. He raced inside, eyes wide. "Grandma, this is your cafe?" he asked, wonder coloring his voice. I nodded, smiling. "Welcome, sweet boy." Alice looked around, visibly impressed. She approached me, hesitant. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said softly. Tears glimmered in her eyes. We embraced tentatively, the tension of the past month still present, but overshadowed by a genuine moment of mother-daughter gratitude. Leo hopped onto a stool at the counter, letting his spiky hair bounce. "Can I have a hot chocolate?" he asked. With a playful grin, I whipped up a creamy cup, topping it with extra whipped cream and a drizzle of chocolate sauce. His delighted giggle was the sweetest sound, a testament that not all relationships were beyond repair. Late in the day, once the bustle calmed, Alice helped me wipe down tables. She admitted things had been rough at home, with Thomas calling her for constant favors. He'd lost some of his social circle after Miranda left, and apparently, he was a bitter shadow of his former self. Did I feel sorry? Maybe a tiny part of me did, but mostly, I felt freed from that vortex of resentment. I served Alice a warm pastry on the house, and we talked more openly than we had in years. I explained how I wasn't closing the door on a relationship with her and Leo, but that I also wasn't returning to that old dynamic. She nodded, tears returning as she promised she'd do better. For Leo's sake, for mine, and for herself. We parted that evening with a gentle hug, and I whispered, "I love you, Alice. Always have, always will." For once, I believed we both felt the gravity of those words. Night settled in, and I locked up the cafe, stepping outside into crisp air. The moon hung low, shining bright enough to illuminate the street. I tucked my keys into the new coat's pocket, pausing to absorb this moment. I had my own business, a budding reconnection with my daughter and grandson, and best of all, a sense of self-worth that couldn't be snatched away. Just then, my phone buzzed. To my surprise, it was Thomas. I hesitated, but curiosity won out. I answered, bracing myself. His voice crackled like an old radio. "Celine," he began awkwardly, "I heard you opened some cafe. People in town are talking. Congratulations, I guess." The words sounded forced, but I could detect a shred of sincerity. Or maybe I was just hearing pity. "Thank you," I replied curtly. Silence expanded, thick and uncomfortable. Then he asked, "Any chance we could talk? Maybe meet up sometime?" For a split second, I flashed back to the last time we were in a room together. The heaviness of his scorn and the memory of that hot water scalding my chest. Anger flared. Did he think we could just share a coffee and bury everything? "Thomas," I said, voice firm, "we've signed the divorce. I've got nothing more to say. I don't hate you. I just refuse to give you any more of my life." A hollow pause followed before he mumbled, "I see. Goodbye then." The line clicked dead, leaving me with an odd sense of finality. I stared at the moon overhead, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Goodbye indeed. My phone's reflection showed me my newly transformed face. A woman with mocha curls, wearing her own style, in charge of her own destiny. I turned away from the street, stepping back into the quiet warmth of my cafe to gather my purse. On the counter sat a small container of leftover pastries I'd set aside for Hank. I decided to drop them off at his place on the way home, a simple gesture of friendship in a life newly crowded with possibilities. Nothing would ever be the same again, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Last check-in. Comment 1. If you feel this is the perfect ending. Comment 2 if you're hoping for more. Thank you for being part of the journey. I wish I could say everything ended neatly, that Leo perfectly understood my decision, that Alice never backslid into expecting too much, or that Thomas found a new love and lived happily ever after. But real life is a constant ebb and flow of lessons, regrets, and small triumphs. What matters is that I survived, and I finally learned to stand up for myself. I visit with Leo almost every week now, and while there are moments he asks tough questions, like why I couldn't stay for his birthday, I answer honestly, explaining that grown-ups sometimes need to protect their hearts too. Alice and I are closer than we've been in years, though the distance I keep is deliberate. I won't be returning to the role of the overworked, invisible mother. Thomas remains a distant echo, a phone call here or there quickly ended. Sometimes he crosses my mind late at night, but mostly I think about how vital it is to claim your own worth before it's too late. As for me, I'm doing just fine. My burn scar has faded into a faint patch on my chest, a testament to how wounds heal if we let them. The cafe continues to bloom as a cozy haven in Pineville, and my new hair, mocha curls parted to one side, shapes my face in a way that reminds me daily I can choose who I want to be. I can choose the color, the style, the cut, and no one else's opinion matters as much as my own. That's the beauty of stepping out of someone else's shadow and into your own light. After 4 decades of living in a home that slowly eroded my spirit, I reclaimed myself. Sometimes I whisper into the quiet of my empty living room, Celine, you made it. And that's enough, because the quiet is peaceful, not lonely. And the life I've built, small, simple, but wholly mine, means more to me than any facade of family unity ever could. To those who wonder if it's ever too late to start over, I offer this. If you're still breathing, you're still growing, and if you're still growing, you can still begin again. Thank you for listening to today's powerful tale here at her Fireside Stories. Our protagonist taught us something valuable, that it's never too late to reclaim your life, dignity, and happiness, even after decades of quiet suffering. Did you resonate with Celine's brave journey? What would you have done if placed in her shoes? Drop a comment below and let me know your feelings about today's story and any personal insights it may have sparked. And remember, your support means everything. So hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss another emotional and empowering story. Until next time, keep your hearts open and your fires burning bright.